Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of insightful sources, articles, research, our own notes, and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, custom-tailored for you. Think of it as your shortcut to being truly well-informed, with surprising facts and just enough humor to keep you hooked. So, imagine this scenario. You're in a meeting, right? Maybe a strategy session. Could even be back in a university class. And someone brings up an old text, like really old. We're talking a foundational book or maybe an article from decades ago.
Yeah, something from the 60s or 70s, maybe even earlier.
Exactly. And this little voice pops into your head. Maybe even say it out loud. Why are we still reading this? It just feels so, well, dated, kind of distant.
Irrelevant, almost.
Totally. What relevance could a text written way back then possibly have for today's world? With everything moving so fast, AI, global shifts, the digital age. I know I've definitely thought that more than once, just shaking my head at digging through, dusty old books. Well, today, we're taking a deep dive into precisely that question. We're going to explore the enduring value of what people often call management classics.
Right, those big foundational pieces.
And our mission here, it isn't just about a history lesson. It's really to unpack why these foundational texts aren't just, historical relics collecting dust somewhere.
They're not just museum pieces.
No. Instead, they can actually be incredibly powerful, really practical tools for navigating the challenges we face right now, the really contemporary stuff.
Things like AI integration, you mean? Or maybe the shifting geopolitical landscape.
Exactly that. From AI in the workplace to, those complex global politics. We want to show you how to approach these classics with fresh eyes, how to draw out these surprising insights that you might otherwise just completely miss.
And the core idea we'll be exploring today, it really lines up with that powerful image from Robert Merton, standing on the shoulders of giants.
Ah, yes. Love that analogy.
It's all about leveraging the established wisdom, the insights of those who came before us. But here's the tricky part, and this is where we hope to guide you today. How do you actually do that effectively? How do you stand on those shoulders without just getting lost in the past?
Right. How do you use that height to see further into the present and the future, not just looking backwards?
Precisely. How do you make it a launch pad, not an anchor?
That's the perfect framing. Because by the end of this deep dive, our goal is that you won't just have like a newfound appreciation for older knowledge, though hopefully you will.
Yeah, that's part of it.
But you'll also walk away with some really practical ways to apply it to your current challenges, whether you're in business, deep in academic research, or maybe just trying to understand the world a bit better.
It's about making the past genuinely relevant and, crucially, actionable for your present and future.
Okay, all right, let's kick things off with a pretty fundamental question then. Before we even talk about their value, what exactly is a management classic anyway? Because, let's be honest, calling something a classic can feel really subjective, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's like deciding what counts as beauty. We all have our personal favorites, don't we? The books or articles that really clicked for us.
Totally. The ones that changed how I thought about something.
Right. So to try and move beyond just that pure subjectivity, to build a more generalized, sort of agreed-upon definition, the editors and the editorial board members of the Academy of Management journal AMJ, which is a really top publication in the field, they actually did this collaborative thing.
Okay. What do they do?
They surveyed their members, basically asking them what truly makes a classic in our field. And what they collectively landed on is this. A management classic is a widely influential article or book that has significantly shaped theory and practice.
Okay. Widely influential, shaped theory and practice.
Often by initiating or redirecting a major conversation in the field.
So it's not just about age then. It's about the impact. It starts something new or it changes the direction of the conversation. That makes sense.
Exactly. It creates ripples. And it's a concept that is, as they put it, socially constructed and, importantly, continually reconstructed by the members of the field itself.
Socially constructed. Okay, break that down a bit. How does that happen?
No, think of it starting like this. A novel, genuinely convincing idea gets published. Maybe it's a book, maybe an article. And it's powerful enough that it persuades other researchers, their peers, to adopt it, to use it in their own work.
So it catches on.
It catches on. And then over time, it gets consistently reevaluated, debated, maybe challenged, but ultimately it's judged to be foundational. Foundational to an important theoretical perspective, or maybe a whole paradigm. And while its popularity might, ebb and flow, sometimes it's more in vogue, sometimes a true classic usually stays relevant. It keeps getting cited, keeps serving as a cornerstone for new research building upon it.
So the key evidence is that it keeps getting referenced.
That's what the sources say is the strongest evidence, yes. This consistent, regular, and continual citation in articles. Even if sometimes, and this is an interesting point they make, even if it's sometimes cited for what they call normative or symbolic purposes.
Normative or symbolic purposes.
Mhm.
Okay, what does that mean in practice? Are people just citing it because they feel they have to, like ticking a box?
Pretty much, yeah. Sometimes a scholar might cite a classic just to signal, I know my history, to show they're aware of the foundational texts, even if they're only referencing a very narrow point from it, or maybe not really engaging with the full depth of the original work at all.
Huh. So it's almost like a hat tip to the past rather than a deep dive into what it actually said.
Exactly. A symbolic gesture more than substantive engagement in some cases.
That's a really useful distinction. So just to be clear, we're not talking about, say, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations here, which is absolutely a classic, no doubt, but in economics. It's a general classic from another field. We're really zeroing in on those specific texts that have profoundly shaped the conversation and the practice within management and organizational studies.
Yes, that distinction is key. And here's where it gets even more interesting because despite this foundational role, these management classics, well, they often lose relevance in contemporary research over time. But, and this is the surprising part, not usually for the reason you might think.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Why do they lose relevance then, if not because they're proven wrong?
It's not primarily due to rigorous critique, where someone definitively disproves the core ideas. Instead, it's often due to something the sources call institutional forgetting.
Institutional forgetting. Wow, that sounds like a fascinating paradox. I mean, we're supposed to remember what's foundational, right? So how do we collectively forget something that's meant to be so important? Does that mean we're just intellectually lazy, or is there something more systemic going on?
It is a powerful paradox, isn't it? And it seems to be more systemic than just individual laziness. The sources give a couple of key reasons for this. First, classics, especially the book-length ones, they tend to be really broad and rich, covering a whole landscape of interconnected ideas.
Right, they're often quite dense.
Very dense. But the way scholarly progress works, it's often cumulative and path-dependent. Researchers naturally tend to build on the parts of earlier works that seem most immediately relevant to their current question. And this often leads to what gets called typified citations.
Typified citations.
Yeah.
God, that sounds a bit like jargon again. Can you unpack what that means practically for the content that actually gets cited?
Good question. Let me try and explain. Imagine a seminal book has, say, 10 really big, profound ideas in it. But over the years, the academic community might, maybe unconsciously, collectively focus on just one of those ideas. Perhaps it was the one that sparked the most initial follow-up research or the one that's easiest to grasp.
Okay, so one idea kind of becomes the headline for the whole book.
Exactly. So when people cite that classic later on, they're often only referencing that single well-known aspect. The broader, richer, often more nuanced ideas from the original work, they just get overlooked. They fade from the collective memory simply because no one's actively engaging with them anymore.
Wow, so it's like constantly quoting only one famous line from a huge, complex novel, and eventually people forget the rest of the story, the context, the deeper themes.
That's a great analogy. We cherry pick the bit that's currently most useful or fashionable, and the rest just
Yeah,
think, well, gee,
it's
I
into the
can-
background. The classic becomes a shorthand for one specific idea rather than a prompt for deep engagement with the whole.
It becomes a symbol, not a source. Precisely. But here's the fascinating twist. Paradoxically, a really rigorous, critical assessment can actually renew interest in a classic. It can bring it back into the spotlight.
How does that work? You'd think criticism would make it fade faster.
Well, consider the example of Mark Granovetter's 1985 critique of something called transaction cost economics, or TCE.
Okay, transaction cost economics. That's a bit of a mouthful. Quick detour. Can you give us the nutshell version for those of us not steeped in that particular theory? What's the basic idea?
Sure thing. At its core, transaction cost economics, or TCE, is a theory championed by people like Oliver Williamson that argues companies design their organizational structures like deciding whether to make something in-house versus buying it from an external supplier, primarily to minimize the costs associated with those transactions.
Cost-like.
Things like searching for partners, negotiating contracts, monitoring performance, dealing with potential opportunism. It's often framed around efficiency and reducing the risk of being taken advantage of in a deal. It's quite an economic, rational perspective.
Okay, got it. Minimize transaction costs. So what did Grenovetter do?
Well, Granovetter challenged this rather clinical view with his famous embeddedness perspective. He argued that economic actions are never just about pure logic or cost minimization. They are always deeply intertwined with or embedded in social relationships and networks.
Ah, so people don't make decisions in a social vacuum. Relationships matter, trust matters.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. His critique didn't actually diminish TCE's influence. If anything, it did the opposite. It stimulated further research evaluating and defending TCE's core propositions, as scholars like David and Hahn pointed out later.
Yeah.
People jumped in to test TCE more rigorously, to define its boundaries better, partly in response to Granovetter's challenge.
So the critique forced a deeper engagement.
Precisely. An active, critical engagement breathed new life into the theory, forcing the field to re-examine both its strengths and its weaknesses, its scope conditions.
That's a really powerful insight. It suggests that a classic doesn't necessarily fade just because it's old or even flawed. It might fade because it's not being actively discussed, challenged, re-examined. It needs that intellectual sparring to stay vibrant, maybe.
That seems to be the argument, yes. A classic really tends to fall out of favor only when scholars stop citing it altogether, when it no longer sparks any new questions or debates, critical or otherwise, which really underscores the point that substantive re-engagement, whether it's critical or appreciative or somewhere in between, can generate significant value.
It keeps the ideas in play, lets them evolve, maybe reveals applications we never would have thought of initially.
Exactly. It prevents that institutional forgetting.
Okay, so the big takeaway here for you listening is that what makes something enduring isn't just its age or even its initial groundbreaking idea. Yes, sustained influence matters, but it's also about its potential to continually spark new thought, to withstand rigorous re-examination, and even to benefit from active critique. We're talking about ideas that just refuse to lie down quietly. All right, now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, I get what a classic is, and I see why they could be important in theory, but why should I, right now, bother to re-engage with them? This is the big so what question, isn't it?
The relevance question.
And the answer, according to the sources we're looking at, is pretty compelling.
Right.
It's because we are living in truly transformational times. We're facing entirely new kinds of phenomena, incredibly complex challenges every single day.
Yeah.
And the pace often feels, well, dizzying.
It really does. Just think about the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. It's reshaping entire industries, job roles, maybe even the fundamental nature of human work faster than many organizations or even individuals can really adapt.
Totally. Or think about the evolving business implications of geopolitical tensions. It's not just background noise anymore. Organizations now have to navigate these incredibly complex, sometimes morally fraught, global landscapes just to operate.
These are genuinely new challenges, things that simply weren't on the radar, or at least not in the same way when many of these classics were being written back in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
And look, while new phenomena sometimes absolutely demand entirely new theories, we definitely need new thinking, no question, it's not always the case that we have to start completely from scratch every single time.
That's a crucial point. Our sources emphasize that there are these moments when re-engaging with a management classic proves invaluable. It's not just about dreaming up novelty. Sometimes it's about recognizing the surprising resurgence of a foundational idea, often because a past context suddenly resonates strongly with a new one.
Can you give an example of that? A classic idea making a comeback.
Yeah, a great one is the work of Philip Selznick. Back in 1949, he wrote this amazing book called TVA and the Grassroots. He studied the Tennessee Valley Authority, this huge U.S. government project, and his foundational ideas explored how organizations become infused with values, how they develop a kind of character, and also how external pressures shape their internal dynamics.
Okay, values, external pressures. Sounds relevant already.
Right. And his concepts have actually seen a significant resurgence recently, particularly amidst the growing scholarly attention on how institutionalized values within organizations affect their behavior, especially in times of major social and political change or upheaval.
So his old ideas are helping us understand things happening now.
Exactly. Researchers like Lucas, Grimes, and Gemin highlighted this just a couple of years ago, showing how Selznick's classic from the mid-20th century unexpectedly provides this really valuable lens for understanding contemporary issues nearly 70 years later. It's a real testament to the enduring nature of some fundamental human and organizational dilemmas.
That's truly fascinating. It really shows that the deep, fundamental questions asked way back then can sometimes be the absolute perfect framework for making sense of today's incredibly complex world. So the core question we're really digging into here is, how can scholars, and honestly anyone who wants to be well-informed and effective, how can we effectively draw on these management classics to inform developments in the world of today? Okay, I am ready to roll up my sleeves now. Because the promise here isn't just about, admiring old books on a shelf. It's about finding practical wisdom, stuff that can genuinely surprise us and help us navigate today's world.
Yeah.
It's about finding the timeless in the timely. So how do we actually do that? What are the concrete, practical methods?
Right, this is the critical how-to piece. And what's really fascinating here is that these aren't just like abstract academic exercises only for researchers in ivory towers. They offer incredibly robust frameworks for critical thinking. Frameworks that anyone grappling with complex information or trying to solve a tricky problem can actually use.
No, tools for thinking, basically.
Exactly. Structured ways to look at established knowledge with fresh eyes and pull out actionable insights.
Okay, so it's not just a vague feeling of appreciate the past, but actual methodologies. The sources we looked at point to 3 distinct and I think incredibly practical ways we can truly engage with these foundational texts. The first one, let's call it revising a classic. What's involved there? Hashtag revising a classic, updating for new realities.
Okay, so revising a classic. This pathway means challenging and then proposing substantive changes to the taken-for-granted assumptions about how a classic theory is traditionally understood or applied.
Taken-for-granted assumptions, like the things everyone just assumes the theory means.
Precisely. It's about questioning those default interpretations. And it's also about refining its scope conditions, which is just a fancy way of saying the specific contexts or circumstances where that theory is most applicable and maybe where it isn't. And by doing that, by updating it for new realities, you can generate fresh insights.
This pathway feels absolutely essential, doesn't it?
Yep.
Especially given how much the world has changed. I mean, so many of these foundational theories came out of an era dominated by huge hierarchical industrial companies.
Right. Think post-war manufacturing giants.
Exactly. They just might not fully capture the dynamics of today's world. Digital platforms, super fast-moving environments, all the new organizational forms we see, like startups or gig economy structures. So revising lets us fine-tune where a theory actually applies, maybe incorporate new dimensions, and get more relevant insights for our current context.
You've nailed it. And let's look at a concrete example that really brings this pathway to life. It involves comparing the classic work by Tom Burns and G.M. Stalker from way back in 1961, The Management of Innovation, with how it was challenged and revised much more recently by Sein, Mitsuhashi, and Kirsch in 2006.
Okay, Burns and Stalker. That one's a true cornerstone of organizational theory, right? Their core idea, if I remember correctly, was identifying those 2 ideal types of organizational structures, mechanistic and organic.
That's the one.
And they argued that the ideal structure for an organization is actually contingent on its environment. It depends on the situation. There's no single one best way to organize.
Absolutely right. They described a mechanistic structure as having, rigid hierarchies, really clearly defined roles, centralized decision-making, lots of formalized procedures, think classic bureaucracy. And this, they argued, was most effective in stable, predictable environments where efficiency and control were the main goals.
Makes sense. Control works when things don't change much.
Right. But then, conversely, they described an organic structure. This one had flexible roles, much more open communication, reliance on informal networks and knowledge sharing, and they argued this was far more suitable for dynamic environments, those characterized by rapid change, uncertainty, the need for innovation.
So stable environment, mechanistic, dynamic environment, organic.
That was the core insight, and it was truly landmark stuff. It effectively laid the groundwork for what we now call contingency theory in organizational design. Hugely influential.
Okay, a real classic. But then, fast forward to 2006, Sein, Mitsuhashi, and Kirsch come along. And they ask this crucial question. Does this classic theory still apply in the same way to new ventures, specifically startups, operating in highly dynamic environments?
Because intuitively, based on Burns and Stalker, if you've got a highly dynamic environment, you'd think, okay, organic structure is the way to go. Be flexible, be adaptive.
Yeah, that follows the original logic.
But here's where Sein and his colleagues made this really counterintuitive argument. They proposed that newly established firms, startups, might actually benefit from adopting a more mechanistic structure even in those turbulent environments.
Wait, really? Mechanistic for a startup in a fast-changing market? That sounds backwards. Why would they argue that?
It does sound backwards at first glance, but this is the critical nuance, the real revision. Their rationale drew heavily on another classic idea from Arthur Stinchcomb back in 1965 called the liability of newness.
Liability of newness. Okay, what's that?
Stinchcombe basically observed that new organizations face inherent disadvantages compared to older established firms. They lack established routines, they lack legitimacy in the eyes of customers or investors, they often lack resources, they're fragile.
Right, starting anything new is hard.
Exactly. So Sine and his colleagues argued that mechanistic structures, things like clear roles, formal processes, defined hierarchies, actually help these new ventures reduce ambiguity, enhance coordination, and increase legitimacy during their early resource-constrained stages.
Ah, so the structure provides a kind of anchor, a clear roadmap when everything else is chaotic and uncertain.
Precisely. It helps them overcome that liability of newness. It gives them stability and predictability internally, even when the external world is nuts. And their findings were really compelling. They looked at internet firms that were established back in 1996. Talk about a dynamic time.
Oh yeah, the dot-com boom era. Definitely
Yeah.
dynamic.
And they found that the ventures with higher role formalization, more functional specialization, higher administrative intensity, all hallmarks of a more mechanistic setup, those ventures significantly outperformed those with more organic structures.
Wow. So that completely flipped the script, at least for that specific context. Startups in hyper-growth, turbulent industries.
It really did, and this revision provided several really valuable new insights. First, it showed that the effectiveness of a structure depends not just on the environment, but also crucially on the organization's life stage. Formalization might benefit new ventures, while organic structures could be better suited for more mature, established firms.
Okay, so context matters, but
Yeah.
so does age or maturity.
Second, it recast formalization. Instead of just seeing it as bureaucratic rigidity, it was reframed as a potential strategic asset for achieving clarity, responsiveness, and legitimacy when resources are tight. Structure as a tool, not a hindrance.
That's a powerful reframe. Structure as an asset for startups.
And third, they introduced this interesting concept of administrative intensity. Basically, the ratio of founders or managers to employees as a novel driver of performance in new ventures. It highlighted the importance of having dense managerial oversight when you don't yet have established routines and processes to guide things.
Wow, okay, that really makes me rethink how I've always viewed structure, especially for startups.
Yeah.
We're so often told they need to be agile, loose, maybe even a bit chaotic to innovate.
Right, the move fast and break things ethos.
Exactly. But what you're saying, based on this revision, is that for a new venture, that structure isn't necessarily a straitjacket. It might actually be the scaffolding that enables agility and growth by providing that much-needed anchor in a sea of unknowns. It helps them reduce that liability of newness. That's a genuinely surprising insight that really challenges the conventional wisdom.
It absolutely does. And it really highlights that even the most groundbreaking theories have these scope conditions, these specific contexts where they apply best. Revising is all about understanding those boundaries, questioning them, and maybe extending them thoughtfully. And often that process reveals surprising new truths.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So revising is about updating an existing framework, tweaking it for new realities or specific contexts. But what if you encounter a classic that just feels like it holds so much fundamental wisdom, it feels like it could apply to completely different problems, maybe in different fields even if it wasn't originally written with those problems in mind? How do you tap into that latent potential?
Oh, well, that leads us perfectly into our second pathway, repurposing a classic. Hashtag repurposing a classic, bridging disciplinary gaps. So, repurposing a classic. This pathway involves leveraging insights from a classic theory to help solve a problem in an adjacent theory or research area, a place where the classic seems relevant, but historically it's been overlooked or maybe only played a really peripheral role.
Adjacent theory. So, like using an idea from sociology to solve a problem in management, or vice versa.
Exactly. Or even within management, using an idea traditionally applied to, say, strategy, to shed light on a problem in organizational behavior. It's about recognizing the untapped potential of established ideas to cross boundaries.
I can definitely see how that would happen. As you said before, classics are often very rich and broad when you go back to the original source. They cover a huge conceptual territory, but their actual application in contemporary work can become relatively narrow over time because of that path-dependent scholarship we talked about.
Right. A classic might become the absolute cornerstone for one specific research area, while its potential relevance to other areas is just, well, ignored or forgotten. It's like having this incredibly versatile Swiss Army knife, but only ever using the main blade, forgetting about the screwdriver or the tweezers.
That's a great analogy. So can you give us an example of repurposing in action?
Absolutely. A brilliant example involves Peter Blau's 1964 classic, Exchange and Power in Social Life, and how it was repurposed much later by Colquitt and Rodell in 2011.
Okay, Blau's work, that's foundational stuff in sociology and organizational studies, isn't it? The basic idea being that social life is fundamentally about reciprocal exchanges people give, people receive, organizations interact, all hoping for some kind of return.
That's the core premise, and Blau used it to explain all sorts of things. Why people or organizations form ties, how power dynamics and dependence shape those relationships, how influence patterns work, and ultimately how broader social structures emerge from all these repeated exchanges over time.
And historically, it's been really central to studying things like social networks, power relations within organizations, that kind of thing.
Precisely. But here's the key point for repurposing. Blau's powerful framework had historically played a much less prominent role in the distinct, though clearly related, study of organizational justice and interpersonal trust.
Justice and trust. Okay, seems like exchange theory should apply there, right? Fairness and exchanges, trusting your exchange partner.
You'd think so. But the sources point out that Blau's arguments were not applied to justice concepts until Organ's 1990 analysis, and even after that, his theory remained pretty peripheral in the justice and trust research stream. It was this powerful theoretical lens that just wasn't really being pointed directly at this specific, important problem area.
So the tool was there, but nobody was really picking it up to fix this particular issue of understanding how justice and trust develop in organizations.
Exactly. Until Colquitt and Rodell stepped in back in 2011, they recognized a specific problem in the existing literature on justice and trust. It offered, in their view, an oversimplified portrayal of the causal flow between the two. People were arguing whether justice causes trust or trust causes perceptions of justice, and it was getting conceptually muddled, partly because of different definitions of trust itself. Was it just expecting good things, or was it about being willing to be vulnerable?
Okay, so there was confusion about how justice and trust actually influence each other.
Right. And to sort this out, Colquitt and Rodell brilliantly went back and drew on Blau's 1964 notion that social exchanges cannot develop without a willingness to trust an exchange partner will eventually discharge his or her obligations. You need that leap of faith, that willingness to be vulnerable for exchange to even begin.
Okay, so they brought Blau's core idea about trust-enabling exchange right into the justice conversation. What was the result?
The result was a truly novel contribution. They concluded that the relationship isn't a simple one-way street. Instead, the justice-to-trust causal flow is part of a complex, non-recursive relationship.
Whoa, non-recursive relationship. Okay, hitting the jargon alert again. Can you break that down for us non-statisticians?
Yeah, fair enough. In simple terms, a non-recursive relationship just means it's not a simple case of A causes B, end of story. It's more like a continuous interconnected loop. A influences B, but then B feeds back and influences A, and they're constantly shaping each other over time.
Ah, okay, like a feedback loop. Justice builds trust, and maybe trust makes you perceive things as more just.
Exactly like that. It's a dynamic interplay. And specifically what they found through their research was that one particular type of justice, informational justice, seems to hold a unique relevance to that crucial willingness to be vulnerable aspect of trust.
Informational justice. That's about the explanations people get for decisions, right?
Right.
The quality of communication.
Precisely. It's about providing timely, accurate, and truthful information and explaining procedures and outcomes clearly and respectfully. And Colquitt and Rodell argued that managers who provide honest and truthful justifications for key events foster emotional ties with subordinates.
Emotional ties.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's these emotional ties, this feeling of understanding and respect generated by good informational justice, that creates the reasons for employees to take that leap of faith, to be willing to be vulnerable. Their studies suggested that this informational justice, the how and why of communication, is actually a more critical exchange currency for building deep trust than, say, procedural justice, just having fair processes, which had often been the main focus before.
Wow, that is a huge shift.
Yeah.
So it's not just what the decision is, or even if the process seems fair on paper. It's fundamentally about why it was made and how well that's explained. That's what truly builds the kind of trust where people are willing to stick their necks out.
That was their key finding, yes. It's not just following the rules, it's about the quality of the communication surrounding those rules and decisions. Providing those honest, truthful justifications becomes the currency that builds deeper trust and that crucial willingness to be vulnerable in the workplace.
Okay, my aha moment here is definitely that revelation. How information is shared honestly, with justification, fostering that emotional connection is this critical, maybe often overlooked currency for building real trust. It goes so far beyond just ticking the boxes of fair procedures. It fundamentally challenges how we might think about building strong, resilient relationships in organizations. It's a massive lesson in leadership communication, isn't it?
It really is. And think about the potential of this repurposing approach more broadly. Applying an older theory, like Blau's exchange theory, to a new problem area could be incredibly fruitful for advancing our understanding of all sorts of new phenomena today.
Like what, for example?
Well, think about exchange and power dynamics and the inequalities we see in platform economies or the gig economy. Relationships there are often highly transactional, trust can be incredibly fragile. Blau's framework, even though it was originally designed for more traditional social structures, could offer an incredibly relevant lens for understanding these newer, often decentralized, digitally mediated exchanges.
That makes total sense. So what this all means for you, listening, is maybe take a look at a familiar theory or concept in your own field, something you think you know well, and ask yourself, where else could this powerful lens shine a light? What seemingly unrelated problem, or maybe some new phenomenon that's puzzling me, might it actually help me understand better just by reframing it through this classic perspective? It's about creative application. Okay, so we've had revising and repurposing. But sometimes the answers aren't necessarily in updating a classic or applying it to a totally new field. Sometimes the gold is hidden right there in the original text, but we need to reread it really closely, maybe finding things that everyone else has missed or forgotten over time.
This brings us, I think, to your third pathway, rediscovering a classic. Hashtag tag tag, rediscovering a classic, unearthing hidden gems.
Exactly, rediscovering a classic. This pathway involves, as the source puts it, getting deeply acquainted with the classic text itself, really immersing yourself in it. The goal is to overcome that prevailing selective attention to its content that we talked about earlier, focusing only on the most famous bits. So reading beyond the usual highlights.
Precisely. And then identifying yet unexplored ideas or nuances within the text that can help address contemporary questions. And this pathway holds special promise, particularly with monographs, book-length classics. Why? Because books often offer this really comprehensive engagement with a whole domain. They're incredibly rich sources for fundamental, often overlooked ideas that tend to get lost when things are summarized in articles or later interpretations.
Okay, so digging deep into the original, especially books, to find buried treasure. Can you give us an example of this rediscovery process?
A perfect example involves James March and Herbert Simon's absolute giant of a classic, Organizations, published way back in 1958, and how parts of it were rediscovered by Charles Trevor in 2001 to tackle a modern problem.
March and Simon's Organizations. Okay, that one has definitely maintained a strong, enduring presence in management theory. It's completely foundational for concepts like bounded rationality and decision-making, right?
Absolutely. The idea that human rationality isn't perfect. It's limited by the information we have, our own cognitive limits, the time available. Hugely influential concept.
And it's a true classic in the sense that it explicitly rests on the shoulders of giants itself, building on earlier work by people like Alvin Goldner, Philip Selznick, even Frederick Taylor. It's part of that lineage.
It really is. And the book's conceptual richness, its incredibly broad engagement with both organizations and the individuals within them, provided the basis for all sorts of varied scholarship over the decades. Critically, for our discussion, it directed attention towards multi-level theorizing and research.
Okay, multi-level theorizing and research. That sounds like another one of those potentially complex academic phrases. Could you give us a quick clarification on what that means for listeners?
Sure. Multi-level theorizing basically just means looking at how things interact across different levels of analysis. So, for instance, how an individual's decision might be influenced by their group's dynamics, which in turn are influenced by organizational policies or culture, which are then shaped by broader societal factors or economic conditions.
So understanding that things don't happen in a vacuum, it's all interconnected, from the individual up to the environment.
Exactly. It's about understanding phenomena within that complex, intertwined set of individual, organizational, and broader contextual factors. And this multi-level perspective, which March and Simon championed back in '58, remains incredibly relevant today, maybe even more so given the complexity of the modern world.
That's a crucial point. And yet, despite the book's enduring presence and massive influence, certain rich aspects of the work can still be overlooked or underappreciated. Which brings us to Trevor in 2001. What was he trying to do?
Trevor's aim was to advance research on individual voluntary turnover, basically, understanding why people choose to leave their jobs, a perennially important topic for organizations.
Always relevant, yeah. So how did he use Marsh and Simon?
He did it by identifying two key untested implications that were right there in March and Simon's original framework, but hadn't really been picked up or tested empirically in the decades since. It was a rediscovery of nuance.
Okay, so what was this hidden gem, this untested implication he found?
Well, Trevor observed that while most research building on March and Simon tended to focus primarily on general job availability in the external market as the main factor determining an employee's actual ease of movement, how easy it is for them to find another job, the original framework was actually more nuanced.
How so?
March and Simon originally characterized this actual ease of movement as being a function of both the individual's own attributes and general economic conditions.
Ah, so it's not just about whether there are any jobs out there, but also about your specific skills, your experience, your network interacting with those broader market conditions. That's a subtle but really profound difference, isn't it?
It's a much more nuanced, multi-level view. It recognizes that the same external job market looks very different depending on who you are as an individual. And Trevor's study was grounded in a really careful, deep reading of the classic. He interpreted March and Simon's original, more complex ideas on voluntary turnover to develop new hypotheses. He then combined these rediscovered insights with ideas from signaling theory, how people present themselves and their skills in the job market, and human capital theories, the actual value of their skills and experience.
So he was weaving together the rediscovered classic insight with more modern theories.
Exactly. And he specifically focused on testing the interactions among these different predictors, rather than just looking at each factor in isolation, which reflected that original multi-level thinking from March and Simon.
And the relevance of this today is huge, right? Voluntary turnover, people quitting,
Yeah.
it's a massive issue. Discussions about the Great Resignation, talent retention, it's constantly in the headlines, a major headache for HR departments everywhere.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenon, as the source notes, likely exacerbated under current conditions. It was relevant then when Trevor was writing maybe around the dot-com bust aftermath, and it's certainly relevant now. What Trevor showed is that the theoretical insights the classic offers are applicable across different economic periods, demonstrating the timelessness of some of these dynamics around human motivation, individual capabilities, and market forces.
So Trevor's work really demonstrated that March and Simon's original rich framework still has much to offer to present-day voluntary turnover research, even decades later.
Precisely, and it emphasizes that crucial point. The classics aren't just things to be cited as a formality. They need to be read thoroughly, critically, with an open mind to the nuances and complexities that often get flattened or lost in simplified summaries or conventional interpretations over time.
Okay, my aha moment here is hitting hard. It's the realization that maybe, just maybe, some of the solutions, or at least deeper understandings for today's big challenges like the Great Resignation or ongoing talent retention crises, might actually be found not in the next trendy management fad, but by simply going back and rereading these foundational texts more deeply.
It's entirely possible.
It's a reminder that the complexities of human motivation, the interplay between individual factors and external market forces, these things were understood, often with incredible sophistication, decades ago. Even if we sometimes forget those insights in our relentless rush to find something completely new, it really is like finding that hidden track on a classic album that completely changes how you hear the whole thing, making you appreciate its full, often overlooked depth and genius.
That's a perfect way to put it. And sometimes that intellectual junk drawer in our collective academic attic full of these valuable, seemingly forgotten things holds the exact tool you need for a new problem if only you'd bother to rummage around and look carefully. It's a powerful testament to the enduring insights often buried within these comprehensive classic works.
Okay, fantastic. So we've talked about what management classics are, why they might fade despite their importance, that whole institutional forgetting idea, and critically, these three really powerful practical pathways to re-engage with them: revising, repurposing, and rediscovering. Now let's bring it all together. Let's see how these ideas, these pathways can actually play out and help us understand some of the biggest challenges facing organizations right now in what our sources keep calling these transformational times. It's about taking these frameworks off the shelf and truly applying them.
Right, because it's important to remember that theory isn't static. It morphs over time as scholars engage with it, reinterpret it, and use it to explore different phenomena. So established wisdom can be revised for new contexts, it can be repurposed for new questions, and forgotten insights can be rediscovered, especially when past conditions surprisingly resemble present ones in some fundamental way. And these frameworks, these ways of engaging, are particularly valuable for those of us trying to make sense of highly contemporary phenomena that often feel completely unprecedented.
Okay, let's dive into the applications. Let's start with a topic that is absolutely dominating headlines, boardrooms, probably even dinner table conversations. The AI era. Hashtag the AI era. All right, artificial intelligence. When you think about AI and its massive impact on work, organizations, everything, we can actually connect right back to March and Simon's 1958 classic, Organizations, that we just discussed.
How so? Where's the connection?
Well, remember, a central premise of their classic was that humans face inherent cognitive constraints in processing information. Our brains have limits, and they argued that organizational structure hierarchy, division of labor, actually helps alleviate this burden by partitioning complex tasks and integrating the activities, essentially breaking down huge problems into manageable parts and then coordinating the solutions.
Okay, structure helps humans deal with limited brain power. Got it.
Right. And this is where AI comes in as this incredibly potent candidate for both revising and repurposing March and Simon's original insights. While scholars are definitely still exploring exactly how AI relates to contemporary organizing, a really promising area is thinking about how AI systems and agents can help humans overcome those traditional cognitive constraints.
So AI as a cognitive enhancement tool.
Exactly. AI can support information processing, complex problem solving, and decision-making at scale in organizations, in ways humans alone simply couldn't, as Dirk von Crow pointed out back in 2018. So we can revise March and Simon's original ideas about the limits of human cognition by showing how AI dramatically extends those limits. And we can repurpose their fundamental ideas about organizational structure to figure out how to best design systems that effectively integrate both human intelligence and artificial intelligence.
That makes a lot of sense. Using the old framework to understand the new technology's role.
Another really powerful classic to re-engage with in this AI era is Hackman and Oldham's 1976 job design theory. This theory, which was itself influenced by earlier work by Frederick Herzberg on motivation, proposed that employees are intrinsically motivated. They find work rewarding in itself when jobs are meaningful, challenging, and offer opportunities for growth.
Right, the job characteristics model. It linked specific work characteristics, things like skill variety, task identity, seeing a whole piece of work through, task significance, feeling the work matters, autonomy, having control over your work, and getting feedback. It linked those to higher motivating potential in a job.
Especially, they noted, for people who had a high growth needs strength, people who really value personal development. It's all about designing jobs that are inherently satisfying, not just about pay.
And as AI continues its relentless march, transforming the way work is actually done and fundamentally changing the skill sets required from employees, Hackman and Oldham's theory becomes absolutely critical. It provides a lens for revising our understanding of motivation in this new context.
How so? What questions does it help us ask?
Well, it helps us ask crucial questions like, how do these AI-driven changes affect the motivating potential of different jobs? Are we enriching jobs or de-skilling them? And really importantly, who is being impacted? Is it affecting everyone the same way? Or are the effects different for different groups of employees? Are we seeing positive impacts for some and negative for others?
And we're already seeing research tackling exactly these questions. There was a really fascinating recent publication in the Academy of Management Journal by Jia, Luo, Fang, and Liao just this year, 2024, that offers a fantastic revision of job design theory, applying it specifically to predict how AI assistants affect salesperson creativity and satisfaction.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one. Really interesting findings and very nuanced.
Super nuanced. What they found was that for the highly skilled salespeople in their study, incorporating AI tools to handle the more routine tasks, things like generating sales leads automatically or drafting initial outreach emails that actually enhance their creativity.
It freed them up, essentially.
Exactly. It freed them up from the mundane stuff, allowing them to focus their energy on more complex problem solving, building deeper client relationships, developing innovative sales strategies of the high-value human stuff. But
there's always a but, isn't there?
there's always a but. For the lower skilled salespeople in the study, getting that same AI assistance actually heightened negative emotions. Why? Because the AI essentially intensified the most difficult parts of their job. the complex customer interactions that they were less equipped to handle in innovative ways. The AI took away the easy bits, leaving them exposed and struggling with the hardest parts without the necessary skills or support.
Wow. So the same technology had opposite effects depending on the person's existing skill level. That really underscores the need to think carefully about implementation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it immediately raises further questions that other classic theories can help us address. For instance, if AI assistance starts replacing direct interpersonal advice seeking or informal knowledge sharing between colleagues, is there a risk, as Adam Grant suggested back in 2007, of lowering the level of task significance or relational aspects of meaningful work? Does work lose some of its inherent meaning if AI handles more of the human touch elements? That's a potential rediscovery or repurposing of Grant's work on meaningfulness in this new AI context.
That's a really important ethical and motivational question. And what about skills? If the emphasis in jobs increasingly shifts towards navigating those complex interpersonal relationships that AI can't easily handle, what new competencies become absolutely crucial for success?
Right. Do we need to repurpose earlier insights on things like emotional intelligence, going back to Salovey and Mayer's work in 1990? Or maybe focus more on activating what Tett and Burnett called relationally oriented personality traits back in 2003? Is the future of work less about technical domain skills and more about these fundamentally human, social, and emotional skills?
It certainly seems possible. And we can repurpose even more classic work here. Think about Daniel Katz and Robert Kahn's 1966 work on organizational roles. How do roles evolve when AI enters the picture? Could it increase role conflict or role ambiguity, that confusion or those contradictory demands employees face, which Kahn and colleagues explored way back in 1964?
Yeah, if your AI colleague is giving you different signals than your human boss.
Exactly. Or we could look at Robert Karasek's 1979 theory on job resources and demands. How does AI change the balance of stressors and support structures available in work? Does it add new demands? Does it provide new resources? And even at the team level, if AI starts acting like a team member, we can definitely repurpose classic models, like the input process output model of team effectiveness.
Okay, the input process output model for team effectiveness. Quick refresher. How does that work and how does AI fit in?
Sure. Simply put, the input process output, or IPO model, helps us understand what makes teams perform well. It suggests that certain inputs, things like the team's composition, who's on the team, the resources they have, the design of their task, these inputs influence the processes within the team, things like communication, coordination, conflict management. And those processes, in turn, determine the outputs, which is the team's effectiveness, their performance, maybe their satisfaction.
Okay, inputs, processes, outputs.
Right. So if AI becomes an input, maybe as a tool, maybe even simulated as a member, or if it fundamentally changes the processes, how the team communicates or coordinates, then it profoundly changes how we need to analyze team dynamics and predict team performance using that classic IPO framework. It needs updating, revising.
That makes perfect sense. We need to account for the non-human element.
And we can even go back further. We could rediscover insights from Mary Parker Follett's incredibly prescient work from 1925 on navigating conflict and power dynamics constructively within groups. Or look at the foundational concepts of socio-technical design, initially developed by Fred Emery and Eric Trist, and later expanded by people like Albert Churns in 1976.
Socio-technical design. Okay, another great academic term. Give us the quick translation. What's the core idea?
Right. Socio-technical design is essentially about designing work systems, jobs, technology, processes, structures in a way that jointly optimizes both the social aspects, that's the people, their skills, their needs, how they interact, and the technical aspects, the tools, the technology, the tasks themselves.
So fitting the tech to the people and the people to the tech harmoniously.
Exactly. It recognizes that you can't just throw new technology at people and expect it to work effectively or without negative consequences. You have to design the whole system thoughtfully. And these classic socio-technical ideas offer incredibly valuable insights into how we can balance those often competing demands of social needs and efficiency when we're designing work that involves new technology like AI. How do we ensure human well-being and meaningfulness aren't sacrificed just for the sake of technological advancement or pure efficiency gains?
Yeah. Okay, so for you, the listener, the relevance here is crystal clear, isn't it? How AI is changing your job or your industry or the jobs of people on your team, it might feel completely new and unprecedented. But maybe it can be predicted, understood, and managed better by drawing on these timeless theories of motivation, job design, team dynamics, and socio-technical systems. They offer this powerful lens to analyze something that feels utterly novel, but perhaps isn't entirely without precedent in its fundamental human and organizational impact.
It's about finding the patterns in the disruption.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to our next big contemporary challenge. The structure and strategy of those dominant large digital technology firms, the Googles, the Amazons, the Metas of the world, hashtag large digital technology firms.
Right, and for this we can turn to another giant, Alfred Chandler, and his two foundational classics, Strategy and Structure from 1962 and The Visible Hand from 1977. Chandler was a meticulous business historian. He observed the Second Industrial Revolution, think late 19th, early 20th century, and he detailed how firms used novel technologies of that era, like the railroad and the telegraph.
The internet of their day, basically.
In a way, yes. How they used these technologies to enhance efficiency on a massive scale, which then generated significant financial surplus. And this surplus, this extra cash, allowed them to diversify into new product lines, new markets, and this led Chandler to his famous, enduring insight that generally structure follows strategy. The way you organize your company should support your strategic goals.
And he categorized the rise of those huge multidivisional firms, right? Companies organized into distinct business units, each focused on a different product or market. And he identified that layer of middle-level management, the MLM, as being the visible hand, consciously allocating resources and coordinating activities within these vast, complex corporations. This was his contrast to Adam Smith's invisible hand of the free market, just sorting things out. Chandler saw active managerial coordination.
Absolutely. It was a groundbreaking analysis of how large, complex organizations actually came to be structured and managed effectively in that industrial era. And today, we see these really striking parallels that invite us to repurpose Chandler's core ideas.
How so? What's the parallel with today's tech giants?
Well, think about it. Digital technologies, the internet, cloud computing, big data analytics, AI, they similarly offer these incredible operational efficiencies, rapid market reach, and financial surplus to today's large tech companies.
Huh.
And what are these companies doing with that surplus?
Diversifying like crazy, moving into new markets, new services, seemingly all the time.
Exactly. They're diversifying their businesses at an incredible pace. But perhaps they're doing it with a different underlying strategy and resulting structure than the industrial giants Chandler studied, which prompts this need to understand these massive, widespread changes in organizational forms through a classical lens like Chandler's, but maybe adapting it.
Okay, so you might think, great, Chandler figured it all out. Just apply his model.
Yeah.
But as the sources point out, there are some very valid concerns that Chandler's theories may no longer fully apply, or at least not directly, in today's specific context.
Right. What are some of those concerns?
Well, for instance, Chandler really emphasized the rise of that powerful mid-level management as a key force in allocating resources and coordinating complexity. But today, you could argue that resource allocation may have become even more centralized, maybe concentrated in the hands of just a few owners or top executives in these tech firms.
And maybe that centralization is reinforced by technology itself.
That's the argument, reinforced by the continuous delayering enabled by digital technology, which allows top leaders to have more direct oversight and potentially removes many of those traditional middle management layers that Chandler saw as crucial.
Okay, so the visible hand might be smaller or located higher up or operating differently now. This highlights the need for what our sources call vigilant reading when we engage with classics like Chandler. This sounds like a blend of revision and rediscovery.
Vigilant reading. I like that term. What does it mean in practice?
The idea is that the purpose isn't to, idealize the spirit of an ancient industrial revolution or treat Chandler's work as gospel. Instead, it's to consciously reuse existing insights and avoid reinventing the wheel, while also being careful not to blindly adopt outdated assumptions.
So take the good stuff, question the potentially outdated stuff.
Exactly. This kind of vigilant reading demands a critical approach. It means asking, what parts of Chandler's observations represent truly timeless principles of strategy and structure? And what parts were maybe specific to the historical context he was studying, the technologies, the market conditions, the regulatory environment of the Second Industrial Revolution?
Okay, so re-engaging with Chandler's theories vigilantly requires us, first, to appreciate the political, social, and economic context in which those theories were formulated. That's what the sociologist Max Weber might call understanding the tradition behind the theory.
Right. Understand where it came from.
And then we have to critically consider whether those ideas or parts of them can be used more freely to interpret and explain phenomena today without deep retrospective understanding of every historical detail. That's closer to what Weber might call using reason, applying the logic, the principles, more broadly?
It's about recognizing the historical scaffolding it was built on, but then carefully extracting the universal architectural principles, if you will, that might still apply.
And this vigilant reading allows us to revisit that prior theory and critically examine the relevance of some of its core assumptions and ideas in today's world.
Yeah.
Like, is that powerful middle management layer really as central now? Or have other coordinating mechanisms, maybe algorithms or platforms themselves, taken over some of that role?
Exactly. It means you don't have to be a dedicated Chandlerian scholar, deeply steeped in his specific historical tradition, to draw valuable insights. You can use his fundamental frameworks like structure follows strategy as a powerful lens to interpret new phenomena like the rise of digital platforms, but you do it critically, understanding which parts are likely universal and which might be context-specific and need adaptation or revision.
This raises such an important practical question, doesn't it? When you're reading any classic or even just established best practices, how do you effectively discern the universal principles from the details that were tied to a specific time and place? It's all about being that vigilant reader, not just a passive recipient, being willing to question, adapt, and maybe repurpose the core logic.
It's intellectual due diligence, really.
That's a powerful lesson for anyone in business today, I think. How do you critically evaluate that historical advice or those seemingly timeless best practices within your own company, given how much the organizational and technological landscape has changed? Don't just accept it blindly. Vigilantly scrutinize it, understand its origins, and then figure out how to adapt the underlying principle for today's realities.
So for instance, if data is the new oil, as they say, and if customer network effects are the new drivers of market reach, how might a company like Google or Amazon be designing their internal structures specifically to leverage those digital currencies? That's taking Chandler's foundational structure follows strategy idea and repurposing or revising it for the unique strategic drivers of the digital age.
Exactly. It's seeing the enduring logic align structure with strategy, but adapting the specific manifestations of that structure for today's unique strategic resources and goals.
Wow.
Brilliant.
Okay, on to our final application area, and it's a really challenging one. Organizational leadership in an era of intense political polarization and geopolitical tension. #tag organizational leadership in an era of political polarization and geopolitical tension.
Yeah, this feels incredibly relevant right now and often quite divisive. How can classics help us navigate this landscape?
Well, for this, we can turn to James McGregor Burns's hugely influential 1978 classic, simply titled Leadership. Burns, who was actually a renowned historian and political scientist more than a management scholar initially, observed that the prevailing thinking on leadership back in the 70s was often focused primarily on power, individual motives, and resources. He felt this was kind of a naked power approach, and he thought it was outdated and seriously incomplete.
Okay, so he was challenging the idea of leadership as just being about wielding power or controlling resources.
Yes. He presented this powerful counterpoint. True leadership, Burns argued, consists of leaders inducing followers to act for certain goals that represent the values and motivations, the wants and needs, the aspirations and expectations of both leaders and followers.
So it's a reciprocal relationship. It's built on shared purpose, shared values, not just command and control.
Exactly. It's a mutual elevation. And he grounded his arguments, interestingly, in Abraham Maslow's famous 1943 hierarchy of needs.
Maslow's hierarchy.
Right.
Okay, the pyramid. Physiological needs, safety, belonging, esteem, self-actualization.
That's the one. Burns reasoned that leaders who manage to elevate their followers to focus on higher levels of needs, things beyond just safety or belonging, up towards achieving personal growth, moral fulfillment, contributing to a purpose larger than themselves, these leaders achieve leadership at its highest level. He called this transforming leadership.
Transforming leadership. Okay.
And he said this occurs when leaders and followers essentially raise one another to higher levels of motivation and morality, often by appealing to deeply held values like justice, liberty, equality, or concern for others. It's about tapping into those higher ideals.
This transactional transforming distinction, transactional being about the exchange, do this, get that, versus transforming being about shared values and elevation. That distinction, which was later elaborated and popularized in management by Bernard Bass in 1985, it became an absolute classic framework in its own right, didn't it?
Yeah. Hugely influential, inspired thousands of research papers, became a standard paradigm taught in practically every business school around the world, and the core message of this whole body of work has remained pretty consistent over the years. While transactional leadership might get you baseline compliance through rewards and punishments, achieving truly exceptional performance, innovation, and deep commitment often requires complementing it with transformational and other forms of values-based leadership, things like authentic leadership, ethical leadership, servant leadership. You need that inspiration, that appeal to values to get people to go the extra mile.
Okay, so that's the classic model. Transformational leadership based on shared values and higher purpose is generally seen as ideal for high performance and commitment. Now, fast forward to today.
Exactly. Now, fast forward to our current era, an era marked by intense political polarization within countries and rising geopolitical tensions between nations. And suddenly, the fundamental questions that Burns was posing back in the late 1970s about the nature and morality of leadership feel incredibly, again, relevant, maybe even more urgent.
How so? What's the specific connection?
Well, think about the context today. We see nations pitted against nations, deep ideological clashes, fracturing societies, and organizations, especially multinational ones, finding themselves facing incredibly complex compliance decisions. Decisions where complying with a government mandate in one country might directly conflict with the company's own espoused values or the values held dearly by its employees or customers elsewhere.
Right, like navigating sanctions or deciding whether to operate in a country with questionable human rights practices, or even just dealing with intense pressure to take a public stance on divisive social issues at home.
Precisely. And this creates this profound modern leadership conundrum. It almost forces a difficult revision, or at least a complex repurposing of Burns's original challenge about values-based leadership.
What's the core conundrum?
It's this. If leaders comply with actions that seem to go against their organization's espoused values, maybe they feel forced to by regulation or economic necessity or geopolitical pressure, how can they then genuinely exhibit that transformational leadership that's supposed to inspire followers towards higher moral purpose? Doesn't the compromise undermine the very foundation of that values-based appeal?
Yeah, it feels hypocritical potential.
It could easily be seen that way, but then flip the coin. If leaders don't comply, if they stick rigidly to their values in defiance of external pressures, they might risk threatening the organization's very viability, its ability to operate, maybe even the jobs of their employees. Does that, in turn, invalidate their leadership if they can't ensure basic survival? It feels like this potential no-win situation where deeply held values clash directly with pragmatic survival instincts.
That is a deeply uncomfortable dilemma. And it forces us to go back and really rediscover the nuances in Burns's work, maybe even revise parts of it for this harsher reality.
Yeah.
It raises this really difficult question. Does the sheer uncertainty and instability of today's geopolitical environment sometimes require leaders to, maybe temporarily, revert focus to lower needs on Maslow's hierarchy?
Like prioritizing basic safety, security, just providing clear sense-making for employees amidst the chaos, perhaps before they can realistically appeal to higher morals or purpose.
Exactly. Is there a time when ensuring stability trumps espousing values? And the source material we looked at even speculates quite provocatively that maybe a new form of transformational leadership may be required for these times, one that is perhaps less tied to the leader's own fixed espoused values, but rather takes on a more fluid, even ambidextrous and paradoxical form.
Ambidextrous and paradoxical. Okay,
Yeah.
those are interesting words. What might that kind of leadership actually look like in practice, holding contradictory ideas at once?
That's the implication. An ambidextrous leader in this kind of context might be someone who can skillfully manage the tension between short-term compliance demands and long-term value commitments, maybe switching focus between them with agility as the situation requires. A paradoxical leader might be one who can articulate the importance of core values while simultaneously acknowledging, openly, the difficult compromises required for survival or operation in a complex world. They embody the tension rather than trying to pretend it doesn't exist.
So maybe less about perfect consistency, more about navigating the contradictions honestly.
Perhaps. For example, think about a leader of a global NGO working in a really unstable, conflict-ridden region. They might need to repurpose Burns' core ideas about transformation. Maybe they first need to appeal directly to their staff's fundamental needs for safety and sustenance, ensuring basic operational security, before they can realistically talk about the higher moral purpose of their mission. They're adapting the application of transformation to the harsh realities on the ground. It's a practical repurposing or revision of his framework, based on context.
And it's fascinating how Burns himself, way back in 1978, seemed to anticipate some of this complexity. He actually wrote that conflict, disagreement over goals, fear of outsiders, competition for scarce resources, immensely invigorates the mobilization of consensus and dissensus. He recognized that crisis creates energy, both positive and negative. And he then asked the crucial question, consciousness of what? Which of these motives and goals within followers are to be tapped? He understood that leaders have choices about which needs and values to appeal to, especially in times of conflict.
Wow. So what this really means for us today is that the very foundations of what we typically consider good leadership, often based on consistency, clear values, inspiring purpose, are being seriously tested by the complexities of our current world in ways maybe we haven't seen for decades. And Burns' work, written almost 50 years ago, doesn't give us easy answers, but it gives us the framework to ask the really tough, essential questions about how leaders can navigate these incredibly complex ethical and strategic dilemmas. It's a profound challenge to simplistic leadership models.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of our whole discussion, it really encourages critical thinking about whether truly universal leadership principles exist, or if effective leadership, like organizational structure, is also fundamentally contingent on the broader societal, political, and economic landscape. It highlights the dynamic nature of leadership effectiveness and reinforces that constant need to revise, repurpose, and rediscover insights from the classics to make sense of the present.
It's powerful to consider. How do the leaders you know or admire navigate these kinds of moral and strategic quandaries today? Does their leadership sometimes feel more fluid, maybe even paradoxical, as they try to balance competing demands in these transformational times? Perhaps without them even explicitly realizing they're embodying some kind of new form of transformational leadership that Burns might recognize. Maybe you're even doing it yourself in your own role.
It's clear that re-engaging with these classics in management offers this incredible wealth of ideas and knowledge. And arguably, as the sources suggest, it's a wealth that is profoundly underutilized in our constant rush for the next new thing, the latest buzzword. It's really a call to move beyond those merely symbolic citations and engage in genuine, substantive intellectual work with these foundational ideas.
The problem, as our sources really highlight, is that too often we fall into that trap of normative, ceremonial, typified citations. That habit we talked about earlier, just referencing a classic as a nod without truly understanding or using its depth. And this kind of shallow engagement, they argue, actually narrows our collective knowledge. It can foster a kind of scholarly laziness by encouraging intellectual shortcuts. And ultimately, it undermines our ability to access the profound theoretical and practical insights that are so desperately needed to address the complexity of our transformational times.
So the solution proposed is clear. Recognize the immense promise still held within these classics and make a conscious effort to substantively re-engage with them.
And this also has real implications for how we train the next generation of scholars, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources argue that all of us involved in training PhD students, whether it's through the courses we teach, the supervision we provide, or the co-authorship we engage in, we have a responsibility to actively introduce students to the classics, not just mention them, but really introduce them.
And more than just introduce them, right? Encourage them.
Exactly. Encourage them to actually devote the time and energy to delve into these works, help them decipher their wealth of knowledge, and then, crucially, guide them in substantively utilizing, building on, and extending that knowledge in their own research, while at the same time actively discouraging that purely ceremonial, name-dropping style of engagement. It's about teaching deep critical engagement, not just rote citation.
And finally, the sources point out that editors and reviewers at academic journals also play a really crucial role here. They can proactively suggest to authors when we see an opportunity to examine and engage with this or that classic as a potential path toward enriching the theoretical insights or practical implications of a paper. It's about seeing those connections and encouraging authors to explore them. It's really a collective responsibility across the field to keep these intellectual giants alive, relevant, and contributing to our understanding.
So this entire deep dive really is about equipping ourselves and encouraging others to critically engage with the present and hopefully shape a better future, partly by learning how to stand thoughtfully, critically, and productively on the shoulders of those giants who came before.
Okay, so let's quickly recap our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've explored why these things we call management classics are far, far more than just historical footnotes gathering dust. They are living documents, potentially offering invaluable insights if we approach them with intention. And we've shown you 3 concrete pathways to actually do just that, by revising them for new contexts, repurposing their insights for adjacent problems, or rediscovering their often hidden or forgotten gems through deep reading.
And we've seen, through examples, how this deeper, more substantive engagement with foundational ideas can genuinely illuminate some of the most complex contemporary challenges you might be facing in your own work and life. From navigating the disruptions of the AI era to understanding the evolving structure and strategies of those massive tech giants to wrestling with the challenges of leading effectively in an increasingly polarized and unstable world. It's really about bringing the enduring wisdom of the past into the urgent strategic dilemmas of today.
So as you go about your week, here's a challenge for you, something to maybe mull over. Consider this. What classic text or concept or foundational idea exists in your own field, your industry, or just an area of personal interest that might be ripe for one of these approaches, ripe for revision or repurposing or maybe just rediscovery? What surprising insights might it hold for your current challenges, or perhaps for the next big question you're trying to answer? We really hope this deep dive has given you not just some interesting ideas, but maybe some practical tools to find out and perhaps to see your world with just a little more depth and perspective.